Today's guest is an NMD, author, evidential psychic medium, medical intuitive, ancestral healer, as well as a dynamic keynote speaker. She teaches several different spiritual workshops, as well as one-on-one sessions for readings, ancestral healing, medical intuitive, and shamanic guidance and healing. Let's welcome today's guest, Dr. Lotte Valentin.
Thank you so much. I enjoy being here.
Well, it's interesting for me, as I mentioned to you earlier. I've seen you on many different podcasts. I've listened to you on podcasts and different shows on YouTube, and it's very fascinating, inspiring for me to see a person who has the popularity, the book that you've written, which is in one of the top spiritual aspects of writing, as well as being in 10% globally of podcasts in terms of the work you've done. And going back to school in your mid-50s is very inspiring and interesting. And the ability to encompass all the different modalities for healing is very motivating and interesting and inspiring. So maybe you can give us just a little bit of a background on how this all started and where you came from and what kind of work you did prior to the work you do now.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. So I hope that, my story will inspire other people to really tune into their true essence and their heart and ask themselves, am I doing what I love to do? Right. So my journey is, I was born and raised in Sweden, which is in Northern Europe. And I moved to the United States when I was 21. And I was very scientific. I was confirmed. I was raised Lutheran, but we didn't really go to church. My father was raised going to Sunday school, and he said, no, we'll go for big events, but not the every Sunday churchgoer. And so I was confirmed. I didn't believe a word. You die, that's it. Life is over. Had no faith. Did not believe in God, did not believe in Jesus, did not believe in angels, did not believe in the afterlife. You die, it's black, you're gone. That was my understanding of the world. So then I married an American when I was 21 and moved to the United States, went to school in Boston. And so probably have a little bit of a Boston accent at times because I learned English. I learned a lot of my English in Boston. So went to school there, and I was always drawn to the healing profession, but never followed it. My father was a physician. My mom was a hospital floor administrator. One of my older brothers became a surgeon. And everybody I was surrounded by as a child all my parents' friends were, and back then, because I was born in the late 1950s, so in the 1960s, it was just very common that the man was the doctor and the female was the nurse. And my dad always told me, he said, I want to be a doctor. I told Dad, and he said, no, you do. You want to, it takes so long and it's so much work. Why don't you just become a nurse? Then you can get married, you can have children. And it was, well-meaning from the era that I was raised in. And he just, wanted to protect this little girl kind of thing. But I said, no, I don't want to be a nurse. And so then I married the American, went to the United States. And again, I thought, should I major in sciences? Should I just follow Dad's advice and be a nurse? But it was such a language barrier. I walked around, back then we didn't have internet. So I walked around with a dictionary under my arm and tried to understand what the teachers were saying. And I would write down sometimes the homework that the teachers would say in phonetics, just spell it the best I could. And then I would get home and I would read that sentence to my husband and his best friend, who helped me, who actually tutored me a lot. He was an engineer. And I said, this is what my homework is. And they would look at me and say, yeah, what is the question? And I said, I don't understand what I'm saying. I didn't understand the words I was using, right? So I couldn't understand what they wanted me to do. So that was, a tremendous language barrier that I had to overcome. And anyway, I majored in business and computer science, and then I worked for IBM as a programmer and systems analyst. So talk about being analytical,
Right.
Very methodical, black and white, step A leads to step B leads to step C kind of person. And then I started having children. I had my first son and I took a leave of absence. We moved from the East Coast to California. And then I had another child, and then eventually I had a third child. So I had 2 boys, and then I had a girl that was born in 1992. And that is when my life changed. So I gave birth. First of all, I gave birth to that child in between a 7.4 and a 7.2 earthquake. I think they actually reclassified it as a 7.3 earthquake, but the newspaper, the next day said 7.4. And I gave birth in a hospital in the eastern part of Anaheim. If people are familiar with where Disneyland is in California, the eastern part of Anaheim kind of borders out to the desert. And that quake was centered in the desert, which is why we didn't have any major destruction. So it was actually a more powerful quake than some of the other quakes that came later, because it depends where the epicenter is. So this, I believe it was the Landers quake, if I remember correctly. So I was in the middle of contracting, like 3 minutes apart, and this earthquake hits. And they were leaning over me on the table to hold on, because they would have fallen over if they didn't hold on. I would have levitated off the bed. All the instruments, they have those little metal trays in the hospitals with all the metal instruments, and they were just levitating up and down. Wow. There were floor to ceiling windows, and they were just rattling. And that was one of the times in my life when I said, I never thought I was going to die this way, because that's kind of, you have your life sort of flash before your life and say, oh my gosh, my boys are at home. My parents were visiting from Sweden to take care of the boys. They were 6 and 3.5. And I'm just thinking, those ceiling tiles are just going to fall in. We're just going to be buried in the rubble. Right. And it just rattled and rattled, and we lost the power, and everything just went silent. And the earthquake stopped. And with that, my labor also stopped. So we called, my husband called home, and the phone lines were still working. I said, we're okay. Everything is swinging. The lights are swinging in the ceiling, and they were all the way down in Huntington Beach. So quite a ways from that epicenter. And then my labor stopped, and about after half an hour or so, my labor kicked back in, and I gave birth to my daughter. So here comes the first after effect of that. So there, we only have a night light in the birthing suite, because we don't have any power. So the whole hospital is running on generators. And then as soon as they gave me the baby to hold, it was the first time I was going to hold the baby. I just, leaned backwards and just screamed to my husband, take the baby. And I was in such severe pain. And then I had all this hemorrhaging, all these large blood clots come out. So they put me on Pitocin drip and try to contract the uterus down. And when I gave birth, I said to the midwife and nurses, I said, something is wrong, because it felt like, imagine putting duct tape on the inside wall of your abdomen, and then somebody just rips that tape off. Wow. That's what it felt like something was ripping inside of me. And I had already given birth twice before, so I knew there was something wrong with that. And I asked the midwife, I said, look at the placenta. Do you have all the pieces of my placenta? And she flipped it backwards and forwards, and she said, yeah, it looks complete. But then my dad told me later that, if you're missing a tiny little piece like your pinky nail, that's enough to cause a whole infection and hemorrhaging later on. So I stayed an extra day in the hospital, and then 10 days later, I hemorrhaged a blood clot like the size of a baby's head. So we go back to the ER. They do a whole manual inspection. They say, well, it could have been the second lining that came out. Sometimes that happens. And they kept me for observation for 2 or 3 hours. And then they said, well, everything looks good, so we're going to send you home. And no ultrasound, no lab work, nothing. This is 1992. So the next day in the evening, I hemorrhage again. So, and it's like 9:30 at night or so. And I said, we're not going back. Let's call the hospital. So we called them and said, I'm hemorrhaging again. Should we come back? But I said, there's no point in going if they're just going to watch me for 2 or 3 hours and then send me home. So they decided I should see the physician in Huntington Beach the next morning, where we lived. So the next morning comes around, I go see the physician, I tell him what has happened. I've hemorrhaged twice. Same thing again, manual inspection. Well, there is so much blood coming out right now. And, it could have been another lining. I'm thinking, well, how many linings can you have? Right. So he sends me on my way. No lab work, no ultrasound, just this manual inspection. I go home. Afternoon comes around 4 or 5. I hemorrhage again. So then we said, okay, this is the third time the massive amounts of blood are coming out. I mean, at some point you're going to lose so much blood that there's none left. So we said, let's go back to the ER. So we went back to the ER. Same thing again. They come in, they do a manual inspection, and they said, well, it's not much much blood coming out right now, but we'll keep you for observation. And they closed the door, and I'm just lying on this table in the ER. And then all of a sudden I started bleeding again, started hemorrhaging. And all I could think, I had already been bleeding. This is my third day of hemorrhaging. So I was like, okay, well, I'm bleeding again. Maybe this time they'll find something or see that I'm actually bleeding, because they keep thinking, this woman is crazy or this woman is exaggerating. I don't know what they were thinking. So I'm lying in this room on this table, and just by chance, this nurse comes and she opens the door. And she just comes to check on me. I think the spirit world sent her and said, go check on this woman in there. So she opens the door and she looks at me on this bed, lying on the paper on this table that are all bloodied. And her jaw just drops. She's like, oh, and you can see the horror on her face. Yeah, and like you hear the call in the loudspeaker going across the hospital, OBGYN stat to the ER, OBGYN stat to the ER. And I'm just thinking, great, they finally figured out something is wrong. So, and I'm still conscious. I'm still, doing okay. So this elderly gentleman comes full speed, jogging and completely out of breath, probably ran down the stairs from, some other floor, with a younger physician in tow. And the first thing they do is examine me. So he looks and says, how much have you been bleeding? And the nurse had already cleaned up all those papers and put new paper down, but he looks in the wastebasket and he can see, all the blood on those papers. And he said, how much have you been bleeding? And I said, this is the third day, I've hemorrhaged 4 times now. It started on Wednesday. So they start doing their manual inspection. And as they do so, another huge blood clot comes out. And at that point, I try to sit up and tell him, I said, I don't feel good. And obviously this doctor knew exactly what was going on, because he knew the history now. So he just pushed me back down on the table. And now my eyes close and I can hear the hospital staff pouring into the room. And I have a nurse on my left trying to get an IV placed, because back then I guess they didn't place IVs as a precaution, because now many times you go to the ER, they'll put an IV in, and so that they have access to your veins. Because once you start going into shock, your veins collapse and it's really hard to get access to the veins. So that's why, many times you feel like, I don't need an IV. I'm just here for something else. But if something goes south, they can now inject medication. So it's a good thing that they do that today. So here she is trying to place this IV. And the nurse on my right has my blood pressure cuff on my arm. And she's quoting the blood pressure as it keeps dropping. And I'm lying on this table, and the table keeps tipping backwards, and my head keeps going down towards the floor. My feet is going up in the air. And all I can think is, what's taking her so long to get that IV in? And now I just feel like I'm falling. So imagine jumping out of an airplane without a parachute, and it's just free fall. So, and that's probably also my blood pressure, right? It's just plummeting. So I feel like I'm just falling. But as I'm lying there on this table, and the nurse on my right quotes my blood pressure, and she yells out, 50/15, hurry. I mean, at 60/20, it's like you can barely support a heartbeat. Now you're going into that very, very dangerous zone. And it was shortly after she yelled that out in this very panicky voice that I knew that I was dying. And it's very different from the experience I had when I was giving birth, when I thought that I was going to die, that I think many of us have had, that are in a car accident and they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is it, I'm going to die. Or we're on a bumpy airplane ride thinking the plane is going to crash, and we feel like our life is coming to an end. this was a knowing. I knew that I was dying. So it was a very different experience. And as I'm lying on this table and I have no beliefs in the afterlife or soul survival, but there is nothing left to do but to pray to God. So I pray to God to save my life. I say, I have 3 children under the age of 6. They need a mother. And it was shortly after that I just got pulled out of my body. And so now I find myself floating, 3 to 5 feet above my body. But as I'm outside my body, the first thing that I'm thinking is, how can I be outside my body and still be me? I mean, it was just very perplexing because my body is down there and I'm out here, but I'm still me. It's just like I stepped out of my car or stepped outside my house, right? I'm still me. But in this state, there is also a knowing of this complete peace and unconditional love. I knew that there was no time on the other side. So I had access to like past, present, and future. There was no time in this state of existence. And even so, I've heard also people talking about the silver cord. I didn't see a silver cord or attachment, but I knew that I was attached to my body. It's almost like you're, a balloon that flew out, and you're attached to the string is on your wrist, kind of thing. And so you belong to that. You have some kind of attachment to that body still, because I had, I'm not dead and never coming back. I am coming back. So there's still some kind of attachment to that body. Maybe so we can find our way back. I'm not sure, but right, we belong to that house while I'm here on earth. That's my vesicle. And then I get pulled back down into my body.
How long did it take?
I don't think I was out for very long. I mean, it could be anything from, I have no idea, but my guess is anywhere from like 10 seconds to half a minute or a minute. It wasn't very long because they got that IV in and pushed those fluids in, and then, but the thing happens so quickly. So 1 second you're inside your body, the next second you're not. And it's faster than anything I can imagine, because it's instantaneous. It's just, you're there and then you're outside. Because many people ask me, how did you exit? Did you leave through your chest? Did you leave through the crown of your head? Did you, I have no idea, because 1 second you're there and the next second you're outside. So there might be people that have that experience, who knows, that they exit and enter in a certain place, but I certainly did not. So then I get back in my body, and coming back in my body, the best description I have is, anybody who has seen the original Santa Claus movie with Tim Allen, when he goes through the chimney to deliver presents, right? I mean, that's still my best description. It is like you just get sucked back in. It's like this vacuum. You just, and you're back in your body. So then I stay, of course, another day or two in the hospital, and I can't stand up because I'm so faint, and I, lost so much blood. And the first thing the doctor says is, I have to give you a blood transfusion. And I say, do you have to? Even though I had just been outside my body, because it was in 1992 and a lot of people were getting AIDS from the blood transfusion. And so I said, I have 3 kids under the age of 6. I don't want to wake up 6 years from now and find out I have AIDS. So the doctor said, okay, I'll see what I can do. And you're young and healthy, otherwise I had just turned 34. I was the picture of health. And he said, it depends how quickly you make new blood, and we'll watch you over the next, day or two and see what happens. And they said I was making blood, okay. And they sent me home with all these different, I have no idea what they were, medications and supplements to take to help, make sure that the hemorrhage was stopping, and help me build my blood values back up. And I don't have many memories, because I know my parents changed the tickets back to Sweden twice, because I slept so much, and my hands and feet were ice cold. It was in the middle of, July in California in the summertime, but I had so little blood, and my head was constantly pounding. I couldn't walk from one room to another without feeling faint. And it took me until September until I could sit up in the rocking chair. And my daughter was born at the end of June. So it took quite some time for that to come around. And then it took until Christmas until I could really leave the house. And it was probably about a week before Christmas. I took the kids to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk and ice cream. And it was so exciting because mom took them somewhere, right?
Right.
After 6 months of
Wow.
just having people come to my house and help me and play dates for the kids. And my friends would come help me do laundry because I really couldn't do much. I would get so faint standing up because my blood was so low. And then we got really sick that Christmas, and we didn't have any medical insurance because my husband's company had been bought. And we were, in our young 30s with 3 younger kids. We couldn't afford COBRA payments for healthcare. And I said, no, it's okay. Everything's going to be fine. I'm getting better. It's just taking its time. And so we didn't have any medical insurance because he was, on that 3-month wait. So we go to the walk-in clinic and we all get antibiotics and inhalers and steroids and the works. We all had pneumonia except for the baby. And everybody gets better. The kids get better. My husband gets better. I get sicker and sicker. So 8 days on antibiotics, and now I'm even sicker. So I go back to the walk-in clinic.
Wow.
And they say, weren't you just here? And I said, yes, but I'm still getting sicker. So then they did a blood test and they come back in the room and they say, okay, well, you have no immune system. You either do you have leukemia or AIDS? And I said, well, I hope I don't have AIDS because I didn't get the blood transfusion. And, told them that how slow this process had been to try and build that blood back up.
Right.
So they said, you have to go to the ER because this is really bad. And I said, I can't go to the ER. I don't have insurance. So, and they said, well, it's, it could be life and death and you really need to go. And I said, I will go home. And if I get worse, I promise to go to the ER. So then the next day they called and they said, how are you doing? And miraculously, whatever new medicine they gave me, I was a little bit better than the day before. So I said, I think it's turning around. And, took that a good 4 weeks to come out of that. And then I started bruising. So I started getting these really big bruises. And by May, so now the baby is 11 months, I bumped into the baby's changing table and it gave me a bruise that spanned my entire hip area, like purple and red, and something that would give you a little tiny bruise the size of a nickel. It spanned my whole hip. And again, I'm getting pneumonia, and it's in the middle of May. So again, we're in California. The weather is amazing. People don't typically get pneumonia in the middle of summer like that, or beginning of summer, unless there is something wrong. So I go to the doctor. He thinks, first he thinks that my husband is abusing me because I have this huge bruise on my hip. So and I brought my kids with me too. And so he rips the shirts off my boys to see if they have any bruises. And I said, look, I'm telling you the truth. And nobody is abusing us. This is what happened. I just bumped into the changing table.
Yeah.
So now he freaks out. He says, well, there's something terribly wrong. We have to do lab tests and, and see what's wrong. And so now my husband is on his 3rd job because he was a regional manager in the computer industry. And so he's trying to get back up to his salary. So he takes whatever job he can get. And then we were just about to get insurance. And then here comes another job offer. And I said, no, just go with the job. I'm getting better, right? For each one. So he worked for 3 different companies in that time span that I was really sick. Right. So we were going to now he was with the company he wanted to be with, and everything was very promising. And we were getting insurance July 1st. So I only have about 6 weeks to go. And this doctor says, we have to do lab tests. So anyway, he was very kind. He gave me all the lab work and, prescriptions for medications. And somehow I got out of that one too. I managed to heal. And I did not do the labs because I knew that if I did, obviously something was wrong. I knew enough about medicine, having grown up with parents that always talked medicine. I knew that was a bad sign.
Right.
So I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'll just wait. I ripped up the lab work and said, if it gets worse, I'll go to the ER. But again, I managed to come out of that. So this goes on now for a long period of time. It took me about 6 years to become normal. And there is always this sensation of me leaving the body. So there is, imagine like you lay a puzzle and one piece is sticking up. That's how my soul felt. It wasn't flat with the rest merged in with the rest of the puzzle. So
Right,
it
right.
was sort of sticking up, and my soul would keep jumping out of my body. And I would always just be, no, we can't leave. You have to stay here. Kind of hold on to the soul. And I couldn't stand up and cook for my children. I had a stool in the kitchen. I would sit at the stove when I had to make something like pancakes or something that takes a longer time,
Right,
because
right.
I couldn't stand up long enough, and I would get bruises. I didn't get the very, very big bruises. They shrunk down to more of a, tennis ball size, so to speak. If I put my knee on the floor to tie my children's shoes, I would have a bruise on my knee just from my knee touching the floor. So that's how easily I bruised. And I kept getting sick, and I would, twice a year, I would end up at the doctor. It's the same scenario. So I know I had that suppression. So now afterwards, when I finally fessed up to a doctor before I went to med school, he said, well, probably what you had was a bone marrow suppression, because you had a suppression of your red blood cells and your white blood cells and your platelets. So there is a suppression of all your blood cells. And that's also why you have no immune system. You get sick all the time. You're anemic, you're fatigued, you don't have enough blood volume in your body. So that fits the picture. And people can actually get, it's called idiopathic aplastic anemia. And people can get that just from being pregnant and giving birth. So that picture fit very well to what actually happened. And when I went through med school and learned about all the different diseases and everything, once we got to that one, I said, yeah, that's it. That's exactly what I had. So that doctor was absolutely correct. So here I am in this healing crisis. So now I'm 2 years out from my first NDE, but I'm constantly, my soul is constantly in and out of my body. And so this next NDE happens in the middle of the night. And many times I would wake up in the middle of the night, my head is pounding and I feel like I'm going to pass out. So I take my head off the pillow, pull my legs up, trying to get more blood flow back up to my heart and my head. And so again, this night I wake up and, I feel lightheaded. I take my head off the pillow. And then the same thing that happened in the emergency room happens again. And it's just in a split second, I'm just outside my body, and it's just, you just get sucked out. And I always joke that they saved me too quickly the first time. So I had to have a second kind of experience to really activate my life path, because what happened in this second experience, out of body experience, is very different from the first one. And it sort of gives the rest of my puzzle pieces to what it is that I'm here to do in my work. And how my work is today. It all revolves around this experience. So this second time I just get pulled out of the body, but this time it's more like you're tumbling through space. So think, Star Wars, flying through space. It's more of that feeling. You're just tumbling through darkness, so through outer space. And then I get to this place that I call the mid station. And it's because there was an awareness that there were floors above me, so to speak, and floors below me. So imagine if you go into a skyscraper and you know that there's 100 floors in the skyscraper, but you're going to get off at floor 50. So you push the button for 50th floor and you get off. You know that there are floors below you, and you know that there are floors above you. Even though you're not on those floors, you know that they exist.
Right.
So it was that kind of experience. So it was an awareness of higher levels and lower levels. So I call this the bouncing station, because I got sent back. So it was like the bouncers, they guard. It's almost like they guard you from going higher. That's kind of how I feel. It's like you're not crossing all the way over because you're not done on Earth. So we're catching those that get here by accident, and we're going to send them back. That's kind of the feeling I have about my experience. So I get to this place that I called a mid station, and I hear the most beautiful music. And I don't think there's a day that has gone by in the last 28 years of me not thinking of this experience, because it is that incredible. This music is, you can't make this music on the earth plane. It is more beautiful than anything you can ever create. And I grew up playing the piano and always listening to music, all kinds of music, classical music, country music, folk music, doesn't matter. So I was brought up very musical, and this sound does not exist in this earthly dimension. I tried to recreate it for days on this. We had this big Roland synthesizer that probably had 200 sounds on it.
Right.
And I went through every sound to see if there was anything that sounded like what I had heard, but there was not one sound. And the best description I have of this music is an angelic choir, but more angelic than we can make it sound in the earth plane. And as I hear this most beautiful music, I'm wondering where it's coming from. So I rotate my body. That is, I don't have a body, but I rotate my soul, so to speak, and I see a log cabin, and I'm thinking the music must be coming from the log cabin. So I open the door, look inside, but it's empty. So then I turn to my left and I see another log cabin, which is a mirror image of the log cabin on the right. So I open the door, I look inside, but it's empty. So then I become aware of this growing white, magnificent light. Think of a car dealership spotlight that is shining the spotlight through fog. So it's this immersion of this white cloud, almost like of bright white, magnificent, bright white light that is just sort of enveloping you. And so I turn around to see where this light is coming from. And as I look into the light, which is now surrounding everything and extends out into infinity, it's just light. And in the light, there is an outline of angels. And the music is coming from the angels. Wow. But this, I still don't believe in angels, right? I don't believe in anything that I'm actually experiencing. It would be different if I came from something where I believed in all of this, but I didn't believe in it, but I still had this experience. But then this white light, this white light is just unconditional, pure love. And this light is what we come from. This is source. This is God. This is whatever you want, whatever name you want to give that is what we come from. We are part of that light. We carry that light inside of us. We belong to it. We are all one with it. And then I become aware of two spirit guides, one to my right and one kind of diagonally to the left in front of me. And they are communicating with each other. So the entity on my right says, "What is she doing here? She can't be here. She has to go back," which is why I call it the bouncing station, right? And I'm like, no, wait a second. How can I be outside my body and still be me? And the spirit guide to my left in front of me said, "If I told you, you wouldn't remember, but you will remember this." So somehow they can control, I guess, what we get to remember. So, which is why also this makes sense for me, because it is my life path. Right. And then it is as if I'm standing on the moon, looking down on Earth. But around Earth, there is a silvery, glittery, what I call the fishnet, because the fishnet has kind of like diamond shapes. But there's like sparkles at the nodes. That's why I call it silvery, glittery fishnet. And it's because this is, again, 1994. So we don't have an internet. We can't look these things up and say, let's search on grid around the earth. And here we get these beautiful images today, right? There was no internet. There was nothing that I had ever heard of or seen that, had a hard time figuring out what is this grid. So, and I call it the fishnet because I was raised in Northern Europe, and I would row that little tiny rowboat for my grandmother as she laid nets in the ocean for the family, and then to catch fish for us all to eat. And when she lifted those fish nets out of the ocean in the early morning sun, when the sunlight hit those water droplets on the fish net, they would sort of shimmer and glitter. Right. So I'm standing, so it's like I'm standing on the moon looking down on Earth, and I see this glittery what I called fishnet, because for lack of a better term back then, around the earth. And the spirit guide says, everything on earth is connected to each other. And everything on earth is connected up to this grid. And with that information, I got sent back. So after many, many years, you know, like 8 years later, 10 years later, it was probably around 2002. It was about 10 years after my daughter was born. We lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I would go to that San Francisco Public Library and just comb it for any information on anything that could tell me what did I see? What was that? What's that grid? And could not find any information. I mean, just nothing. I had stacks of books next to my bed. I read like a book a week for a year. It was absolutely nuts, trying to make sense out of this experience. And then I said, okay, that's it. I'm just going to have to let this go. I don't know exactly what that is or what it means. Maybe time will, you know, come around and tell me. And it wasn't until 2013, I was in med school. In 2012, I started med school, and I told this whole story to my daughter, you know, about the experience and the near death. And she looks at me and she says, Mom, that's on the internet. You can Google it. It's called the grid, the grid around the earth. And so, you know, it took that long. So it wasn't until 2013 that all of a sudden I got to see images, and I said, yeah, that's it. Wow. It's like the grid around the earth. So, and then what happened though with these experiences, so after my first near-death experience, that next day in the hospital, I started hearing the spirit world. And my sister-in-law had just passed away 10 days earlier from lung cancer. And as I'm lying in this hospital bed, trying to make sense of what had happened the day before, I was thinking, I can't tell anybody about this because they're going to think I'm crazy. They might lock me up and I'll never see my children again. And this one nurse came and said, you know, did you have any unusual experiences yesterday? Because I'm sure she was there or she knew about it. And I just said, nope, no, none, nothing at all. Yeah. And I wonder how many people still today react that way, because we're so afraid of talking about it because we feel like we're being judged. Because I know how scientific I was myself. Right. If somebody had told me about my own experience before I had my own experience, I would probably have completely discounted their experience and said, oh, they're crazy. That didn't happen. It's all in their head, right? Because I didn't have any beliefs in it. So I completely understand everybody's fear about it, which is also why I'm stepping up to the plate and sharing my own experience, because we are reviving thousands of people every day. And some of these people are going to have these experiences. So the more we can share these experiences, the better it is for all the people that are going to have a near-death experience that might not yet have had one. Yeah. So yeah, that next day I could already hear the spirit world, and my sister-in-law was in the left corner of the ceiling, and she said, everything's going to be okay. And I'm thinking, that's my sister-in-law talking to me. How can I hear her? Right. And kind of again thinking I must be crazy. And then it just continued. So in between the first and the second near-death experience, we were lying in bed and I was awake at night. And I know that my uncle is at the foot of our bed up in the ceiling. So I look at him and he talks to me telepathically and he says, I just came to say goodbye and letting you know that I have passed on to the other side. And so this was my mother's brother. So the next day I figured my mom was going to call from Sweden, because I was living in the United States, right, and tell me about the passing of her brother, but nobody called me. So I said, wow, how strange. And then 2 days went by, nobody called. And then finally on the third day, my mom calls. It was a Wednesday. And she said, you know, how are the kids? How are you doing? All the nice checking in, right, that moms do. And then finally she says, I have something sad to share with you. And I said, yes, your brother passed away on Monday. And he was just dead silent. Yeah. So, and she said, how did you know? And I said, he was here. So, and it's just that, you know, it started like that, and relatives would stop in. And I think part of it was just for me to learn to listen to the spirit world, and know that that it was all there and it's all true. And that we do have, we are eternal life. There is no such thing as life and death. There is only birth and death, because life is continuous.
Yeah, souls.
Right.
And I was going to say to you, in terms of NDEs and me communicating with so many people, like the common person you talk to may have had an experience like you said and never shared it with anybody, but usually it's when we're on a certain path of maybe not being on the path we're supposed to be on, and the universe awakens us by hitting us with somewhat of a brick rather than a feather to awaken. And hearing your story and the insight that you had in the background that you came from, it seems to be somewhat of a common theme of having interviewed people where they had a higher purpose and their purpose was intervened in some way of what they were doing. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. So I came to the world, right? I was the kid that would save the bird, put it in a box. I would be the first kid over if somebody fell down, give them a pat on their back, brush off their knee, just a kind of caring for others. And I mean, now I know that I have a incarnated as an 11 in numerology, which is the master life path for a healer. So it all makes sense now. But back then it was just, you grow up and you don't realize what your path is. That longing to be that caretaker, that healer was always there. But then things happen in your life and you get off on a side track, and your mind constantly tells you things that's not, go this route, this will be easier, right? So my English was tough. Would I have been able to handle the sciences? Probably. Why would the science classes be harder than management and computer science, right? But it seemed intimidating at the time. And I think that there is some truth to that. We go down our paths and then we're sort of not fulfilling our incarnation. I feel like I'm this train going down this track, and they take up the train, to pick the train up and they put it on the other track.
Right.
They're kind of, hello, wake up. You're supposed to be over here. So I think there is definitely some truth to that. There's an awakening, or maybe it's my incarnation was to go through it this way, to be that scientific person, and to then, have these experiences myself. Because now when I work with people that feel like they're never going to heal, because I thought I was never going to heal, I was never going to be normal again, I was never going to have a normal life. But I went through that and I came out on the other side of that tunnel. And so I think part of it is also to give hope to people, because never give up hope if you're on that path right now where it feels like, you've got some chronic illness or cancer or something that just seems impossible to come out of.
Right.
But people do heal, and people heal from different ways. Some people will heal from traditional Western medicine, and if they have cancer, chemotherapy. Somebody else will heal from that carrot juice. Somebody else will have a spiritual healing. But we don't know which ticket we're holding on to. Which ticket is going to get me well? Is it the chemo ticket? Is it the pharmaceutical ticket? Is the herbal ticket? Is the acupuncture ticket? Is the diet ticket? We don't know which one. And so I always tell people, use everything you have. Your body is living in the physical world. So use all the physical things you can use. Use that herbal medicine, supplements, and Western medicine if that seems to be working. Just use what your intuition tells you to go with, and don't feel like you are of any lesser because you're doing one treatment or another. Because I'm a naturopath, I get a lot of people that are spiritual and very holistic, and they would like to avoid Western medicine and pharmaceuticals, but there are times when that is your best choice. Right. And so you have to weigh, the pros and cons of all your different options, and take the best route. That's the route for you. So, never listen to other people when it comes to your own life, because there is only one person in charge of your life, and that is you.
Yeah. It's interesting. And when we talk about the NDEs, which is a very profound experience, and as we just mentioned, pushing a person on the correct path, and also maybe the backgrounds that people come from, where we actually shift the consciousness or the ancestral patterns of families by having this experience. And I know you do ancestral work, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that and then get into your, your medical work. In terms of ancestral work and the experience you had, I don't know if you were interested in thereafter, I guess, in family constellations and the healing of generations and so on and so forth. Maybe you could share a little bit about that. That's an interesting topic for me. I made a documentary film about my grandfather who was killed in World War II. I didn't know him, found his body and connected him to my father, who didn't have an interest in his own biological father, but then pieced the work together. And yeah, so maybe you could touch a little bit upon the ancestral aspect of things.
Ancestral healing is fascinating because, that connection that they showed me when I had my near-death experience, everything on earth is connected and everything is connected to each other. Everything is connected to this grid. And it's not until now, the last few years, that I really understand it. So it really took a good 28 years to put those pieces together and to truly understand it. So when you look at ancestral healing, I could talk about this for hours, so I'm going to try and focus on the ancestral part. But when you look at ancestral healing, we truly are connected to our ancestors in many different ways. So first of all, we come physically from our parents. So we got 50% of dad's DNA, 50% of mom's DNA. But when you look at how we came about, so your mom, the egg that you came from, your mom made when she was a fetus, a 20-week-old fetus in your grandmother's womb. That's the egg that you come from. So think about now, wait a second, what was my grandmother experiencing when she was pregnant with my mom? And what DNA did she inherit from her parents, right? So now you start thinking, if you just stick to the DNA for a moment and the physical component. So that all comes down on the DNA. And we know from mouse experiments, there was one great study that was epigenetic inheritance of ancestral odor fear conditioning. And it was an article that was published back in 2013 in Nature Neuroscience. And it was a study led by Brian Diaz at the Emory University School of Medicine. And they showed that they took male mice and they exposed them to a cherry blossom smell. And every time this little mouse smelled the cherry blossom smell, he would get a little bit of an electric shock. So they learned to fear the cherry blossom smell because they said, okay, every time I smell that, I'm going to get an electric shock. So stay away from that. Wow. Well, then they took the sperm of that mice or several mice, and they artificially inseminated female mice with the sperm from the mice that had been exposed to the cherry blossom and the electric shock. Yeah, wow. Well, her offspring, those baby mice, were more jumpy and afraid of the cherry blossom smell, even though they had never smelled it themselves. But it came down on the DNA, and they also had more receptors for detecting the smell, and they were called M71 receptors. And they had more receptors, so they could detect the smell at even lower levels than their father mice, right? But now think about this for a moment. Just think of the DNAs. We're not even talking about the grid yet, or that interconnectedness that we're all connected. But just looking at the DNA, we know that they have done research on Holocaust survivors, and there's one gene called the FKBP5 gene. I know they've discovered more genes where they can see that the methylation of those genes are different in these survivors, and it's passed down all the way to the grandchildren. So that's, I think, how far that research has gotten. But when you know that, so they know that the trauma that grandfather experienced during the Holocaust, that trauma is passed down all the way to his grandchild. So when you think you're only inheriting diseases, but you're not, you're also inheriting their trauma. Yeah. So anything that is traumatic for your ancestors, any kind of trauma that has not been resolved, that is also what gets passed down. So it's the unresolved actions, reactions, and interactions of your ancestors that gets passed down. So I always look at it like you have a sticky note, and your grandpa couldn't resolve this. Okay, who's down there Oh, Adam's down there. I put this ticket in his bucket. Tick. Now you get another ticket. Then your dad has 3 more tickets. Then your uncle gives you 5 tickets. Okay, you're the only boy, so you get a lot of tickets. You got a big bucket of tickets of all the stuff that they didn't
Yes, yes,
resolve,
yes.
right? And you just kind of wonder, why is it that I'm afraid of the sirens? I've never been in an accident. I've never, been in a fire, but every time I hear a siren, I'm having panic attacks or I'm
Yes,
having anxiety, right? That's the grandfather who lived through the Holocaust and the air raids and the sirens. And every time the sirens went off, he thought he was going to die. Well, think about the mice and how things get transferred. And that's just talking DNA.
right,
But
right.
now we also know that we're connected through this invisible grid or the fishnet, right? Or the spider web, however you want to look at it. Because so the people that just won the Nobel Prize in 2022, there were 3 physicists that won the Nobel Prize that proved entanglement
Yes,
of photons, right? And so we know that if you have an apple and the apple A meets apple B, and now they're entangled because these 2 apples met, and then one apple goes to Australia and the other apple goes to England, and those apples have baby apples. Well, those baby apples are still entangled with the apples in England and Australia. They're still entangled because their parents were entangled. Their
right.
parents had met, and so their parents have this invisible string or bond between them. And whatever happens to those apples in Australia, it affects the apples over in England, right? Because they're connected. And this is what the people just got the Nobel Prize for, showing that entanglement that exists. And it's just incredible, because when you think of it that way, not only do we get our ancestors' issues via DNA, then we also have this entanglement of, grandpa left, his wife, and then moved. Sorry, I hear the cat meowing. So grandpa leaves the family and he goes and finds another wife, and he just leaves his whole family. Well, those things then come back. So that's what I'm saying, because
Yes,
that's like an unresolved trauma, and then people down in the generations all of a sudden have issues, and people leaving and or marrying the wrong person, and the patterns that are not resolved continue. And that's why you see in each generation. So many times when I work with people, and I work a lot with doctors, psychotherapists, counselors actually seek me out, because it's not part of that normal training, right? We get trained in med school with counseling, but it's more recognizing different conditions. This person needs, a psychiatrist to be, evaluated for personality disorder or bipolar or whatever.
right, right.
But this is it's a different way of looking at that entanglement, because many times we don't understand, why am I attracting the wrong person in my relationship over and over? I'm on my 3rd marriage. It's the same thing every time. It's
Yes,
ancestral. And you just have to look at those. You have to look at your ancestors, what happened to them and what happened to you. How were you raised? And then you see that it's like you're painting a painting when asking about the ancestors. And it's, now I'm trained in ancestral healing, right? So there's a certain way that you pick that pattern apart. But the interesting part of how I got into it was I was actually doing mediumship readings, and I had 3 or 4 clients in a row that had the exact same story. It's,
yeah,
you're almost thinking you're having deja vus as you're working, because you're thinking, I just gave somebody a reading yesterday, but it was so similar. And it was always the same. It was, I have your grandmother here. Your grandmother had a really hard life, and she's kind of,
yes, yes,
her head is down, and your grandfather was abusive towards her, and he would hit her, but he also hit the children. One of those children was your mom. And the client would say yes. And then I said, your mom then married your father, and your father was also abusive. Pattern repeats, right?
right.
So your father would beat your mom, but your father also beat you. Is that correct? Yes. And I had 3 or 4 of these readings in a row, which then led me to study ancestral healing under Mark Wallin, who wrote the book, It Didn't Start With You. And so then I learned, from his, 30 years of experience or something, take those patterns apart. This is what we see over and over. And these are the certain ways that things happen and how they come down through the generations. And so I have that, and then combined with my mediumship, combined with my med school knowledge, it has all sort of merged together in this very unique way of being able to dismantle those patterns and understand where those patterns are coming from for that person. Because sometimes I've even worked with people say, I don't really have any memories before I was 12.
Right.
But in those instances, many times the spirit world will come in and I'll say, it's a great, I have your grandfather here. Is he in the spirit world? Yes, this is what he's showing me. Does this resonate with you? And so it's been kind of a fascinating journey. And I know I'm here to help people resolve patterns, right? Break the patterns, step into themselves, raise their own consciousness, create healing for themselves and their lineage. Because when we create healing for ourselves and doing ancestral healing, that has a ripple effect.
Yes.
Right? Because everything is connected. We're all connected. Remember the price in physics, we are entangled with everybody. So when you create healing for yourself, things change within you. But that healing goes backwards and forward in time. So you're even creating forward to, to your own children, to your nieces, to your nephews, because you changed, but you're entangled with everything else. And so when you change, those other components also change. So it's just a an amazing thing that happens.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is the entanglement and the web that you discuss in terms of, I do Akashic record reading. So in terms of the web that I'm reading for myself, I know it's the Akasha or that web itself that's reverberating information back to me when working with a client that I don't even know, but obviously just use a certain name to access the information. And in terms of the authenticity that you exude based upon your ability to incorporate all the different modalities and to have the confidence to be able to do that, hits everything from every side and every corner when working with someone. In terms of the information of your own personal life, of your own ancestral history, I'm sure you had to investigate certain things that took place in order to be authentic, in order to really feel what another person is going through. And maybe you want to share a little bit about that if you want to get into that a little bit.
Yeah. No, of course. It's like they tell you in medical school, if you can't heal yourself, how are you going to heal other people?
Right.
And so going through a program like that is a healing journey in itself. But then, of course, studying ancestral healing, I went into that saying to myself, there's nothing wrong. I don't have any ancestral wounds because my parents were amazing. My mom was very loving and, came from a great family. I don't have any ancestral wounds, but, obviously I'm here to help other people. But then you start studying it and you realize that, of course, I have ancestral wounds. I have ancestral wounds just like everybody else. But sometimes you don't see them because you're so blind to them. Because when you are just a young child, the way you view the world, the way that lens, those rose-colored glasses that you make for yourself, the way you are going to experience the world is, based on the environment that you're in, and you learn from your parents, how are they treating you? How do we deal with this problem or that problem? You learn all those things as a very young child. And that's kind of how you see the world through that lens as you grow up. And many times, I think it's hard to see your own problems, because I know when I work with people like psychotherapists and doctors and counselors, and I tell them, blah, 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 your father was like this, your mom was like this, they see the pattern, from what you're telling me. And they'll say, oh my gosh, I just didn't see it. It's like staring me in my face. I'm too close to see that pattern because I'm in the pattern, right? And these are, and it's fascinating because these are trained professionals, but it's difficult to see your own issues or your own problems. And it's not until you start peeling back that onion that you start seeing, oh, I have an issue with this, I have an issue with that. But it's hard to see it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have my own personal, I've considered myself in my family to be, I guess, the person who broke the cycle, tried to break the cycle. And it was a lot of work in childhood, understanding, having the empathy for others, and then realizing all the dysfunction. And doing ancestral work myself on the maternal side and the paternal side, and seeing the dysfunction, calling people out and in my own way, but people being in denial and making it more difficult. But then adding to the component that I won't give up on doing it, because it does help everyone heal from the past and the future generations to come. You speak about your psychic work and your mediumship, and did you always have this gift, or did you gain it through the near-death experience? Did you recognize it after the near-death experience more?
It was always there. And so I know that as a child, I would have knowledge. I would see auras. I would see spirits in the candle flame, and I'd say to my brother, "Dad, do you see that spirit? There's a man in the candle flame. He belongs to grandma. It's somebody that belongs to grandma," right? And grandma sits down at the other end of the table. And so I had these abilities as a child, and I saw, energy fields around the trees and the flowers. I knew everything was alive, even the rocks were alive. So I came to the world with that knowledge. But then you become a teenager, or and even 7, 8-year-old. And I remember telling my best friend, you see the energy field around the flowers on the table? There's this like big white field. And she looks at the flowers and she looks at me and she says, "No, you're crazy." Right. So, and then, so as a 7, 8-year-old, you say, okay, well, she can't see it. It's probably not there. Right. And so you start not sharing those things and you sort of suppress it. And it wasn't then until I had my near-death experience that sort of it got all reactivated, and then, really, it really took off. And, and I think it was that was just my ticket, that I think it had to be that way for my incarnation. Not necessarily, I mean, it's like I was on the wrong track, but also I think part of it is having gone through that experience then makes me understand my mission now and my work now.
When your parents found out about your experiences, if you shared it with them, what was their reaction?
Oh, I remember this well. So I think it was about, my daughter was about 5, I think, 4 or 5 years old. So it was a couple of years after, and I finally got brave enough. They were visiting us in the United States from Sweden. And I told, my mom, and then my mom said, "You have to tell Dad." My dad looks at me, he's the physician, the scientific physician, which is where I got all my science, right? And he laughs and he says, "That can't happen." So even though, and he was the one who grew up going to Sunday school, he knew the Bible backwards and forwards. And he just looked at me and said, "No, that can't happen. It can't be." And my mom said, "No, but listen, there's something about this. Maybe there's more to life than, we think, or blah, blah, blah." So, my mom believed it. My dad, the scientist, was, "No, that can't happen." And the funny part is that studying at Arthur Findlay College in England for mediumship, during one of the readings I had with my teacher, she said, "Oh, your dad is here." He came in like the end of a reading, and she says, he says, "You proved him wrong," and he's laughing. And I was like, I know what he's saying. I know what he's saying. Wow. So, it's like he came in just to say, and he had come in many times before, but that was the message that time. So, they go over to the spirit world, and all of a sudden, life makes sense. Like, oh my, I'm still here. They're over there.
It's interesting you say that, because I interviewed a man by the name of Hans Wilhelm, who's an illustrator and also speaks on these subjects. And he said he saw a medium. Incidentally, he was walking and somebody said, "I need to tell you something from your father." And he passed on the message. You remember you used to tell me about these things, and I used to hush you and say, "This doesn't exist." He says, "It does exist, and I want to thank you for giving me this information." So the same exact type of story. It's so interesting to hear that. And the interesting thing is that once we open ourselves up, so to speak, to, I guess, the rabbit hole, it's then difficult to then be in the company of people who you feel you can't share your truth or your expansion with. And so with regards to that, how do you manage to balance both worlds? Because you do holistic work and you do conventional medicine work, and you can maybe speak about that as well.
Right. So it's a balance act for sure. you can't really separate it once you get to where I am now. The spirit world is always there. They're always with me. They're always chiming in. I'm always listening. It's like you have one foot in heaven and one foot on earth kind of feeling. So it is just part of my life. And so when I work in Western medicine and I work with somebody who I may not be able to have a spiritual conversation with, or I don't even know where that person stands, and I get a message from the spirit world that says, this person has this particular disease and you should, you need to do an x-ray. And sure enough, that person ends up having that disease, right? But there's nothing that told me so based on the history and why that patient came in. And so you then, suggest that maybe we should just do, we'll just throw this x-ray in just to make sure everything's okay. It's always good. Do an extra checking, you know what I'm saying? So you kind of guide them on that path. But I think a lot of doctors and nurses and healers, I think a lot of them get messages like this and they have that intuition, but we don't talk about it. We don't share it, right? There are many times that doctor or that nurse saves a person's life. They just knew what to do. They just knew what was wrong, but they don't know why or how. They're just acting, right? They get that message. This person his life is in danger, and maybe other people haven't even discovered it yet. But I think that a lot of healers have intuition. Everybody, first of all, have intuition, but we're not using it. We've sort of suppressed it. And it's just a matter of bringing that to light, bringing it to the surface, because Western medicine is so scientific that we have forgotten the spiritual and emotional component that it takes to heal the physical body. We can suppress symptoms very well with Western medicine and pharmaceutical drugs, but we're not really healing it. Many times we're just suppressing a symptom, and we're really good at it, right? Yes, lots and lots of medicines. But to heal that body takes more. It takes, a spiritual journey, an emotional journey, and probably changing things physically as well, and maybe the diet and different supplements and different medications to push that person back to normal health, because it's not just a physical piece, right? You also have the ancestral piece. What did you inherit? Because you can inherit diseases and emotions that go along with certain diseases. If your mother had a certain disease when she was 40 and it made her feel this particular way, and then you come along and then you have a disease that is a different disease, but the emotions that go along with struggling with this disease is the exact same emotions your mom had. Yep. And so there's a lot of ancestral patterns to how we get sick. And so I work with it, when I work as a regular physician, I would say the spirit world is still there and sort of guiding me, but I had to work with Western medicine. You know how it is. You got to code everything. You got to order the right labs. You got to scientifically explain it in your chart notes, what it is that you're doing, right? So it's a very different process compared to when I work as a medical intuitive or ancestral healer in my spiritual business, which I find fascinating, because many times ancestral healing, people hear me talk about it and then something goes off and they say, that's it. I bet it's something ancestral, because I can't figure out what this problem is coming from. Or when I work as a medical intuitive and, just tune in to that body. And many times it's just spot on exactly what their struggles are. And I find it fascinating, because you can help so many people, be working as an intuitive and helping them and then guide them. So many times I scan them, I tell them, this is what I'm getting, because it's always fun to, be scanned and see what gets picked up. And then they'll say, yes, yep, that's exactly right. I've been seeing, 10 doctors for 10 years and nobody can find anything wrong with me. And then for some reason, many times, but I think that's why we're guided to have sessions or meet certain people, right? Is because that person holds some kind of a key or information that person needs.
Yes.
And many times it ends up with me, saying, you actually need surgery. You need to go find a surgeon, and this is how you're going to find the right surgeon, because this is what you have. And that's why it keeps getting missed. And it's typically typically something that we don't have good lab tests for yet, right? We don't have, people think there is something wrong with them. They go to the doctor, they do a test, and then they're going to get the right medicine. Well, that's sometimes true, but many times it's not, because many times we have things that sort of fall through the cracks. We don't have good tests for a lot of things yet.
Right.
As many tests as we do have, and all those people fall through the cracks, and it's always something weird, something that I've typically heard of for one or another reason. But I think that's why we're guided to, have sessions or see certain doctors, or we just feel like that path over there, that person has information that can help me. So I love working like that too, because I can help people anywhere in the world.
I was gonna ask you specifically, when you receive information like a download of your medical intuitive work, is it a voice that you hear quickly, or is it an image that you hear, or a feeling in your body that you?
Well, so when I work intuitively, it's all three. I see images, I hear, and I feel. If I'm working intuitively as a medical intuitive, I typically close my eyes and I scan your body. And most of the time I will feel it. I will feel there is something in my stomach. I will feel there is something, in a gland, and I know where it is in my body. So I know which organ it is. Right. So when I feel it, I was like, oh, that's the adrenal gland. Oh, that's the kidney. Oh, that's the spleen. That's the pancreas. That's, the pyloric valve. That's, and gallbladder. And you just know where it is because you know the body. Right, and so it's easy to tune in. So typically they'll put the feeling in my body, and I can feel there's something that's not right. So if they're dizzy, for example, I'll feel dizzy. So I'll say, you're dizzy every day. And, if they have a headache every day, you have a headache every day. And I just feel it in my body. But there are also times when I'm working, like as a physician, then I typically hear it. And I think because I'm busy, right? My mind is busy. I'm typing, I'm charting, got to get all that information down that the patient is telling me, thinking about tests I'm going to order. And then it's more like telepathic communication. I'll just hear, lung cancer, liver cancer, and it just comes in. It's like somebody shouting at you. Then you start going down that path and thinking like, why are they telling me that? This person came in for something completely different, right? And why am I hearing this? And then you start digging, and then you say, oh, why don't we do this test too? And blah, blah, blah. You kind of guide it in that direction. But what I've learned is that the spirit world is never wrong. So I always trust my messages. In the beginning, when it started opening up, I would think I was just having deja vus in the beginning, and I hadn't seen it or heard it ahead of time. And I would tell my kids about it, or I would write it down like in a journal. This is this today's date. This was my dream, or I just saw this, or I just heard this. And that way, 2 or 3 days later or a week later, I could go back. Yep, there it is. I'm not hallucinating. This is what I experienced. So, I would see, I saw we were going to have an accident. My two youngest kids were maybe like 11 and 13, or 10 and 12, 13, in that age range. And I woke up, and we had a van at the time, and I saw this big black scratch on the passenger side of the van door. And then I saw 2 of my kids in the car, my daughter in the back seat, my middle son in the front seat. And then the third image was me leaving a note on a windshield of a black sedan car. And I was like, why, what is this? We're in an accident. You guys are in the car. And I told these 2 kids, and I said, this is what I saw. Where could this possibly happen? It has to be a left. We're making a left turn because it's the only way we're going to have the right side of the car exposed to oncoming traffic. We figured out that was one intersection in San Francisco, coming off the Bay Bridge, taking the exit, and then we're jogging left at the light down onto the surface streets. And so my kids were going to school in the city, and every day for 10 days, my kids' noses are up against the window, and they're saying, Mom, the coast is clear, you can go. And then we come out of a bookstore in East Bay Walnut Creek, for those people that are familiar with that. And I'm trying to get this van onto this very narrow street, and there's a UPS truck and he's offloading all these books and cars trying to get into this very narrow parking lot. So as I make a right-hand turn onto this street, there is a black sedan car that's parked, and my car scrapes the left-hand corner of the parked car. My right-hand side of my car scrapes the car as I turn onto the street. And now I already know what that is going to look like. So I get out of the car, I see the black scratch, just like I had described it. And I just start laughing. So here, people watching me, here, this, middle-aged woman looking up at the sky, laughing hysterically at her accident. She must be a complete nutcase. And then, of course, here I am. I leave a note on the windshield of the black sedan car, which, of course, didn't have any drivers because it was parked. And so, seeing these things ahead of time. So I always tell people, when you hear that message that says, don't get on the freeway, take the surface streets today, just do it. Just don't even question it. Listen to it, because that's your spirit guides coming in, telling you there's something's going to happen and there's a high chance your car is going to be in that accident. So go on the surface streets. Yeah. So always listen to all those messages that we all get all the time. And it's just a matter of tuning into them.
You wrote a book, Medical School After Menopause. Maybe you could just give us a little summary of what was about and the lesson from the book itself.
Yeah, so I wrote the book, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul. And it's a story, it's a transformational story. And so in that book, I share my 2 near-death experiences, and then all the unusual events that transpired, like starting to listen to the spirit world. The spirit world comes through, starting to see things ahead of time. And then after each chapter, as I tell about my own journey through life, and it starts even back in Sweden, and have some very funny things in it about me being a teenager over there. And after every chapter, there is a message. What is the take-home message from each chapter? And as you go through the book, it takes you on a journey, and so that your soul evolves as you read it. And so it becomes sort of deeper and deeper spiritually as you go along. Yes. But it gives examples of what happened in my own life, so that when you then go on your journey, you have an idea of, how do I open myself up? How do I open up and become more intuitive? How do I learn to speak to the spirit world? And so it's me sharing my journey kind of from the beginning to the end, of all those things and how it all transpired, so that you all can connect with your higher consciousness, connect with the universe, and find your true intuitive powers that you all have inside of you.
Where if somebody wanted to reach out to your website and to book a session, or reach you, where could they do that?
Yeah, so you just go to Dr. Lotte, DrLotte.com, drlotte.com, and then you'll see, my medical information, what I do, working as a physician, and then you can click on the menu and you just click on Work Spiritually with Dr. Lotte, and then you'll see all the different sessions there: Ancestral Healing, Medical Intuitive, Psychic Evidential, Psychic Medium readings, Messages from Your Spirit Guides, which is also a really popular one, because I'll draw the person's spirit guide in like 7 minutes, and then the messages that spirit guide has for that person. So that's also really, it's like a fun session to do as well. So there's many different options to choose from, depending on what you feel called to. If you feel called to work with me, then go to my website and look at the different options, and then just ask your heart, ask your soul, what am I called to do? Right. What am I called to work on today?
If you could leave the audience with one positive message, what would it be?
It would be that we are all connected. We are all one, and it is all divine. Yeah. And so are you.
Okay, thank you. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be in your presence and take in all the different avenues of information, and the ability for us as human beings to have experiences and turn them into something positive and use it in a way to actually assist others and awaken them to life's expansion and higher levels of consciousness, along with being a medical doctor. So thank you, Dr. Lotte, for sharing this
Yes.
moment with me.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Absolutely. Thank you.